Welcome back, everybody. Today, we're going to be doing a deep dive into emotional design.
Ooh, fun.
This will be really interesting. And we are going to be talking about how our emotions are so tied in to how we use and perceive everyday objects.
That's right. And sometimes you just love a product or you just hate it immediately. And we're going to be looking at the psychology behind those reactions and how design really considers our emotions going way beyond just simple functionality.
Yeah, exactly. And our source material for this deep dive is a really fascinating book by Donald Norman. It's called Emotional Design: Why We Love or Hate Everyday Things.
Yes, it's such a good read. I think that it should be required reading for anybody going into any kind of design field because it really is an eye-opener.
Oh, absolutely. And it's written in such a way that's so approachable for anyone, even if you're not a designer, to really kind of get these concepts and to understand how they affect our lives and start this whole thing off. Norman, he tells a story about 3 teapots that he owns. And one is totally impractical. It's more like a sculpture than an actual teapot. You can't really use it,
Ah,
but it is visually stunning. The second teapot is both beautiful and functional, so it kind of strikes this nice balance.
okay.
And then the third teapot is super efficient. It's all about ease of use.
Yeah,
Maybe it's not the prettiest thing in the world, but it gets the job done.
got it.
And the thing is, each of these teapots represents a different level of design. And these levels, they apply to everything we interact with, not just teapots.
That's so true.
So it could be our phones, it could be our cars, it could be, the buildings that we walk into,
Right, absolutely.
furniture, clothes, everything.
Everything. They all fall into these categories.
So let's break these levels down a little bit more.
Yeah.
Norman calls them visceral behavioral and reflective design.
Okay, I like it.
And we're going to start with visceral design because this is about that immediate gut reaction you have to something, and this is usually based on how it looks.
Yeah, think about it. I mean, we've all been drawn to a product just because it looked cool or had, a certain aesthetic.
Totally. And Norman, he even admits in the book to buying a certain brand of bottled water just because he liked the way the bottles looked on his shelf.
I can relate to that. I do that all the time.
Yeah. And remember those colorful iMac computers from back in the day?
Oh, yeah.
They were wildly popular. Even though the hardware was basically the same as the less popular models, they just came in different colors.
But what's interesting to me is that this isn't just about, being trendy or stylish. There's actually a much deeper connection to our biology and our instincts.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we're drawn to things like symmetry, we like vibrant colors. You see this a lot in nature, right? Like flowers and fruits.
Oh, that's a good point.
And it's like our subconscious is picking up on these cues and saying, hey, this is good, this is safe.
So you're saying that designers are kind of tapping into our evolutionary history,
Exactly.
our biology, to create products that we're just naturally attracted to.
I think so. And it goes beyond those natural elements too. Like think about sports cars, that sleek, powerful design. It triggers a very visceral response in a lot of people.
That's true.
Evokes feelings of speed, excitement, even if you're just stuck in traffic.
So it's more than just making something look pretty.
Yeah.
It's about communicating a certain message on this deeper level.
Absolutely. And companies are putting a lot of effort into understanding these visceral responses. They're investing in research. They're doing eye tracking studies to see what people respond to, what catches their attention.
I see. So it's not just random.
No, not at all. There's a lot of science and strategy behind it.
So there's that first layer, that visceral reaction to how something looks. But then there's that second layer, the behavioral design. And this is all about how we use a product, how it feels in our hands, how easy it is to use all of that good stuff.
Right. And this is crucial because you can have a product that looks amazing, but it's a total pain to actually use.
Oh, yeah.
Think about, some websites that are poorly designed. It's so frustrating.
Oh, or like those instruction manuals that are impossible to decipher.
Yeah, exactly. You're like,
Yeah.
what is this supposed to even tell me?
It makes you want to pull your hair out.
Totally. And Norman, he compares this to the difference between using a well-designed chef's knife, one that feels good in your hand and it just slices through everything,
Okay.
versus struggling with a dull, clunky knife that's like, barely cutting through a tomato.
So it's all about that user experience.
Exactly. And good behavioral design, it requires really understanding how people are actually using products. And Norman, he talks about this idea of observing people in real life scenarios to uncover what he calls unarticulated needs.
Okay, unarticulated needs. So what does that mean?
So these are needs that people might not even be aware of until they're met.
I see.
Like a really great example of this is cup holders in cars,
Oh, yeah.
Nobody was really saying, hey, I need a specific place to put my drink in my car. But as soon as they appeared, everybody was like,
Where have you been all my life?
exactly,
Yeah.
and now we expect them to be there.
That's so true. You don't even think about it.
And it makes you think about how many other things we use every day that have these little design features that we might take for granted, but they make a huge difference in how we experience a product.
Yeah, we don't even realize how much thought has gone into it,
Right.
but somebody was paying attention.
Absolutely. And as more and more things become digital, we lose that tactile satisfaction of interacting with physical objects.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
It's like the difference between, turning a knob on a stereo to adjust the volume versus just tapping a button on a screen.
It just doesn't feel the same.
It doesn't, there's something about that physicality that we kind of crave.
That tangible feeling.
Yeah, and that's something that designers are having to grapple with, as we move into this increasingly digital world.
It's finding that balance, right?
Exactly.
And speaking of making things usable for everyone, we should also mention the concept of universal design here.
Oh, yes, absolutely. This is so important. Universal design is all about designing things that are accessible and usable for people of all abilities.
Regardless of age, disability, or any other factor.
Exactly.
Right.
Everyone should be able to use and enjoy the products and services that we create.
I love that.
It's just good design.
So we've got these first two levels, the visceral and the behavioral, but now let's get to the really juicy stuff, this third level, reflective design.
All right, let's do it.
This is where things get really interesting because this is about the meaning that a product holds for us, the memories. It evokes the story. It tells our personal connection to it.
This is where it gets deep.
Yeah, it does. Think about the objects that you really cherish, those things that you would never want to get rid of. Maybe it's a family heirloom or a souvenir from a special trip.
Oh, yeah.
It's not just that they're functional. It's the emotional weight that they carry.
Right. It's the memories and the feelings that are attached to them.
Yeah, yeah. And then a great example from the book is the contrast between like a simple utilitarian Casio watch, just a basic digital watch that tells time, and something like the Pi watch.
The Pi watch.
Which is this really unique watch that displays time in a completely unconventional way. It's like a circle with different slices that represent the hours and the minutes.
I've never seen that.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. But they both tell time. But the Pi watch, it makes a statement. It says something about the person who's wearing it.
I see what you mean. It's like an expression of their personality.
Exactly. And then you have something like a Swatch watch, which is not really about telling time accurately. It's about personal style. It's like wearing a little piece of art on your wrist.
Right. It's about making a fashion statement.
And it's interesting how this seemingly simple object, a watch, can become so much more than just a tool for telling time.
Absolutely. And it's a great example of how those three levels, they can all work together. You've got the visceral appeal of the design, the behavioral aspect of how easy it is to read the time, and then the reflective meaning that the watch holds for the wearer.
It's like a perfect trifecta of design.
It really is.
And it makes you realize how much thought and intention goes into creating these objects that we interact with every day.
And it's not just physical objects either. These three levels, they apply to experiences as well.
Oh, that's true.
Think about something like a video game. You've got the visceral appeal of the graphics and the sound effects.
Oh, yeah. Video games have gotten so visually stunning.
They have.
It's crazy.
And then you've got the behavioral aspect of how the game controls how intuitive it is, how responsive it is. And then you've got the reflective layer, which is the story, the characters, the emotional connection that you build with the game world.
Right. And video games have gotten so sophisticated in terms of their storytelling and their character development.
They really have.
It's amazing.
It's like you're living in another world.
And it's not just for kids anymore. The average gamer is in their 30s these days.
It's true.
And it's pretty evenly split between men and women.
Gaming has become so mainstream.
Yeah, it's gone way beyond that stereotype of, the teenage boy in his basement.
Exactly.
It's really for everybody.
And it's a great example of how technology can create these really immersive, engaging experiences that tap into all of those different levels of design.
It's true. And Norman, he even envisions a future where our game consoles could adapt their appearance and their personality to different contexts.
Oh, wow. That's interesting.
So imagine like your console could look all rugged and serious in the garage when you're using it for car maintenance,
Okay.
But then it could blend in seamlessly with your kitchen appliances when you're looking up recipes.
That's wild.
So it's like this chameleon-like device that can morph to fit any situation.
So it's like it has a personality of its own.
Yeah, in a way, right?
Oh, yeah.
And it's responding to your needs and your environment.
That's fascinating.
And that brings us to another area where these design principles really come into play, and that's robots. as
Yes.
robots become more and more sophisticated. They have the potential to be more than just tools. They could become companions.
That's right.
And designing robots that we can form those kinds of emotional bonds with is a whole new challenge.
It's a huge challenge.
You know,
We have to consider things like appearance, behavior, personality, and how all of those things work together to create a sense of trust and connection.
there's that uncanny valley concept, where robots that look too human-like can actually be kind of creepy or unsettling.
Oh, yeah, that's a real thing.
Yeah.
It's like there's this sweet spot where a robot is lifelike enough to be engaging, but not so lifelike that it freaks us out.
Right. It's about finding that balance.
Exactly.
I remember C-3PO and R2-D2 from Star Wars.
Yeah.
You
Oh,
know,
yeah, those are classic.
such iconic characters.
And they're robots.
Yeah. And they managed to be so expressive and endearing, even though they weren't human.
It's amazing how much personality they were able to convey, even with those limited, physical forms.
Right. And it shows that you don't necessarily need a robot to look exactly like a human for us to connect with it on an emotional level.
Exactly. And Norman, he talks about the possibility of robots having a full range of emotions, not just positive emotions like happiness and excitement, but also negative emotions like sadness and anger.
So you're saying we might actually want robots that can get frustrated or disappointed?
Yeah, it might seem counterintuitive,
Hmm.
but think about it. If a robot is going to be a true companion, it needs to be able to understand and respond to our own full range of emotions.
If we want them to be more relatable.
Exactly. We want them to be more human-like in that sense.
So imagine a home robot that could, express joy when you come home from work or offer words of comfort when you're feeling down.
Right.
And also, maybe even get a little bit annoyed with you if you're not taking care of yourself.
It's like having a friend or a family member who's always there for you.
It's interesting to think about how that would change our relationship with machines.
You really is.
Like we're moving beyond that master-servant dynamic
Yeah.
to something that's more like a partnership.
I like that.
And it makes you wonder, you know, uh, how comfortable would we be with a machine that could really understand our emotional state?
That's a big question, It's something that we're going to have to grapple with as robots become more and more integrated into our lives.
It's a brave new world out there, folks.
It really is.
And we are just starting to explore all the possibilities and the challenges that lie ahead.
Buckle up.
Yeah, it's going to be a wild ride.
That's for sure.
Mm.
Yeah, it really is a brave new world. And we're only just scratching the surface of what's possible with emotional design and how it will shape our future.
I agree. And speaking of scratching the surface, let's go back to those visceral reactions we were talking about earlier.
Okay, sure.
Because I'm really curious about why we're so drawn to certain visual cues, like symmetry, bright colors, those kinds of things.
Yeah. Right. Well, it's not just random. There's a reason why we find certain things visually appealing. And Norman explains that these preferences are actually rooted in our evolutionary past.
Oh, interesting. So you're saying it goes way back.
Way back, back when we were hunter-gatherers, certain visual cues signaled things like safety, a good source of food or water. So we evolved to find those things appealing because they were associated with survival.
So even though we're not living in the wilderness anymore, our brains are still wired to respond to those cues.
Exactly. Those ancient instincts are still there lurking beneath the surface, and designers are tapping into those instincts whether they realize it or not.
That's fascinating. So it's like we're programmed to be attracted to certain things.
In a way, yes. And you can see those elements, symmetry, rounded shapes, vibrant colors. You see them everywhere in product design.
It's like they're speaking to our subconscious, trying to evoke those positive feelings.
Right. And it goes beyond just natural elements too. Remember the sports car example we were talking about? That sleek, powerful design, it taps into something primal. It evokes feelings of speed and excitement, even if we're not consciously aware of it.
So it's not just about making something look pretty. It's about communicating a message on a deeper level.
Exactly. And companies are putting a lot of effort into understanding these responses. They're investing in research. They're using eye tracking studies to see how people react to different visual stimuli.
I see. So they're really trying to figure out what makes us tick.
Right. What catches our eye, what makes us linger. It's all about understanding the psychology of attraction.
It's amazing how much science and strategy goes into designing products that appeal to our gut instincts.
It really is. But of
Oh.
course, as we said, it's not just about appearances. How a product feels when we use it is just as important.
Oh, absolutely. Because a product can look amazing, but if it's frustrating to use, it's not going to be successful.
Exactly. So let's dive a bit deeper into that behavioral design level.
Okay.
This is all about making sure a product feels good to use, that it's intuitive and enjoyable.
Think about the frustration of trying to open a door with a handle that's poorly designed,
Hmm.
you know? You're just like struggling with it.
Or navigating a website that's just cluttered and confusing and you can't find what you're looking for.
Yes, those little details can make a huge difference in our experience.
A huge difference. And Norman, he's a big advocate for what's called human-centered design, which means putting the user at the forefront of the design process.
Okay, so it's really about understanding the needs of the people who are going to be using the product.
Exactly. It's about observing how people actually use products to identify those pain points, and then designing solutions that are truly user-friendly.
And sometimes the best solutions are the ones that we didn't even know we needed.
Right, like those cup holders we were talking about earlier.
Oh, yeah, nobody was clamoring for cup holders, but once they appeared, everybody was like,
Where have you been all my life?
that's so true.
And Norman calls those unarticulated needs. Things that users might not even be able to express, but that designers can uncover through careful observation.
That's really interesting. And it makes you wonder how many other unarticulated needs are out there just waiting to be discovered.
I'm sure there are tons. And as we move towards a more digital world, designers are facing new challenges. How do you replicate that tactile satisfaction of interacting with physical objects in a digital space?
It's true. There's something about flipping through a physical photo album or feeling the weight of a book in your hands that you just don't get from scrolling through images on a screen.
Exactly. And that's where things like haptic feedback come in, trying to recreate that sense of touch in a digital environment.
Oh, yeah, like those game controllers that vibrate when you're playing.
Exactly. That's an attempt to bring back some of that physicality that we crave.
It's like our bodies are still catching up to our digital lives.
I think that's a great way to put it. We're so used to interacting with the world through our senses, and now we're having to adapt to this new way of experiencing things.
It's a fascinating transition, and it makes you realize how much our physical senses play a role in how we experience the world, even in the digital realm.
Absolutely. And it's something that designers are going to have to keep in mind as we move forward.
Yeah.
How do we create digital experiences that are engaging and satisfying on a sensory level?
It's a big challenge, but I think it's one that we're up to.
I agree. And speaking of challenges, let's not forget about that third level of design, the one that gets into the deeper meaning of things.
Right, reflective design.
Hmm.
This is where we get into the emotional resonance of objects and how they connect with our values, beliefs, and memories.
This is where it gets really personal. It's about the story a product tells, the feelings it evokes, and the connections we form with it.
It's about those objects that have meaning beyond their function.
Exactly. We were talking about souvenirs earlier and how they can evoke such strong memories.
Even if they're not particularly beautiful or functional.
Right. It's not about the object itself. It's about the meaning we attach to it, the memories it holds, and how it becomes part of our personal narrative.
In Norman, he dedicates a whole chapter to the emotional pull of souvenirs and how they help us connect with our past.
It's fascinating how these little objects can hold so much meaning for us.
And it's not just souvenirs. Think about family heirlooms that get passed down through generations.
Oh, yeah.
They carry so much weight,
Wow.
representing family history and connection.
Absolutely. And we see this in branding as well. Think about iconic logos or designs that have been around for decades.
Yeah, like the Coca-Cola logo or the Nike swoosh.
Exactly. They evoke a sense of nostalgia and shared cultural heritage.
It's like they become part of our collective memory, connecting us to a particular time and place.
And it's a powerful thing. When a brand can tap into those deep emotions, it creates a really strong bond with its customers.
It's like they're not just selling a product, they're selling a feeling.
Exactly. And it's a reminder that design is about so much more than just aesthetics or functionality. It's about creating things that resonate with us on a deeper level, that connect with our values and beliefs, and that tell a story.
It's about creating things that have meaning.
Absolutely.
And that meaning can be different for everyone. What resonates with one person might not resonate with another.
Right. It's all about understanding your audience and what's important to them.
And as we mentioned earlier, these three levels of design, visceral, behavioral, and reflective, they don't just apply to physical objects, they apply to experiences as well.
That's right. Think about something like an amusement park.
Oh, yeah. Amusement parks are a great example.
You've got the visceral thrill of the rides, the behavioral satisfaction of mastering a game or winning a prize, and then the reflective memories you create with your friends and family.
It's a multi-layered experience that taps into all those different levels.
Exactly. And that's what good design does. It considers the whole human experience, not just the functional aspects, but also the emotional and psychological aspects.
And speaking of experiences, let's bring this conversation back to those emotional machines we were discussing earlier.
Yeah.
You know, it's mind-blowing to think about robots not just as tools, but as companions that we might form genuine bonds with.
It is mind-blowing, and it raises so many fascinating questions. Like what kind of emotions would robots actually need to have to be effective companions?
That's a great question. I mean, we wouldn't want a robot that was just happy all the time, right?
No, that would get old pretty fast.
Yeah, we'd want a robot that could understand and respond to our own full range of emotions.
Absolutely. Norman argues that robots would need a full range of emotions, both positive and negative, just like humans.
So they'd need to experience things like joy and sadness, fear and anger.
Right, to truly connect with us on an emotional level.
So imagine a robot that could sense your frustration and offer words of encouragement, or recognize your sadness and offer a comforting gesture.
Exactly, but then it gets even more complicated. How would those emotions be expressed?
Oh, that's a good point, because if a robot's facial expressions or body language are off, it could be really unsettling.
Right, it's that uncanny valley thing again, finding that balance between familiarity and difference.
We need to feel comfortable interacting with robots, but they also need to be distinct from humans.
Exactly. It's a fascinating design challenge, how to create robots that can communicate emotions effectively without freaking us out.
It makes you wonder if there's some fundamental difference between human emotions and the way a robot might simulate those emotions.
Right. Could a robot ever truly feel empathy, for example?
That's a question that philosophers and scientists are still debating.
But even if robots can't perfectly replicate human emotions, they could still provide valuable companionship, especially for people who are lonely or isolated.
That's a good point, and as technology continues to advance, it's likely that robots will play an increasingly important role in our lives.
Yeah.
Whether as companions, caregivers, or something we haven't even imagined yet.
Absolutely. And as designers and consumers, it's important to be aware of these different levels of design and how they influence our perceptions and our experiences.
It's about understanding how our emotions are tied into the products and services we use.
Exactly. We can't just focus on functionality anymore. We need to consider the whole human experience.
It's about creating a future where technology serves humanity, not the other way around.
And that's a future I'm excited to be a part of.
Me too. It's fascinating to think about all the possibilities and challenges that lie ahead.
And speaking of challenges, let's dive into a specific type of robot that presents some particularly interesting design considerations: robot pets.
Robot pets like those robotic dogs and cats you see.
Yeah, those ones.
I admit I've always found those a bit odd.
I understand, but they've become incredibly popular, especially among older adults and people who aren't able to care for a real pet.
I can see that, and it raises some interesting questions about why we form attachments to these machines.
Right. Is it just about having something to cuddle with, or is there something deeper going on?
I think it's probably a bit of both. On the one hand, there's that element of anthropomorphism, where we tend to project human emotions and intentions onto animals.
And we do the same with robots, even though we know they're just machines.
So we might see a robotic dog wagging its tail and interpret that as happiness, even though it's just a programmed response.
Exactly. But on the other hand, these robot pets can provide genuine comfort and companionship, especially for people who are lonely or isolated.
I can see that they offer a sense of connection and routine, and they don't require the same level of care as a real animal.
Right. And I've heard that robot pets can even be beneficial for people with certain health conditions like dementia.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there's growing evidence that interacting with robot pets can reduce stress and anxiety, improve mood, and even stimulate cognitive function in people with dementia.
So even though they're not real pets, they can still have a positive impact on people's lives.
Absolutely. And it makes you realize how complex our relationship with technology is becoming.
It really does.
Yeah.
And as robots become more sophisticated and lifelike, it raises all sorts of ethical questions about how we design and interact with them.
Like how much autonomy should we give them? Should we treat them like appliances, or do they deserve some level of respect, even rights?
Those are big questions, and there are no easy answers.
Norman stresses the importance of establishing clear ethical guidelines for robots, especially as they become more integrated into our lives.
We can't just blindly trust machines to make those calls.
Exactly. We need to be thoughtful and intentional about how we design and use these technologies.
It's like we need a new set of rules for navigating this human-robot world.
I think that's a great way to put it.
But it's not all doom and gloom, is it? There's a lot of potential for robots to enhance our lives, to make things easier, safer, and even more enjoyable.
Absolutely. And it's exciting to think about how we can use this understanding of emotional design to create robots that are not only functional, but also compassionate, engaging, and truly beneficial to humanity.
It's like we're on the cusp of a whole new era where technology and humanity are becoming increasingly intertwined.
And speaking of intertwining, have you ever thought about how robots could potentially play a role in our creative endeavors? Imagine collaborating with a robot to write music design, a building, or even paint a masterpiece.
Wow, that's a whole other level. But could a robot truly be creative? I mean, creativity seems like such a uniquely human quality.
It's a great question, and it's one that Norman explores in the book. He argues that while robots might not be able to replicate human creativity exactly, they could still be incredibly valuable partners in the creative process.
So instead of replacing human artists, they'd be more like tools or collaborators.
Exactly. Imagine a robot that could help you brainstorm ideas, generate novel concepts, or even provide feedback on your work from a different perspective.
That'd be amazing. It's like having a built-in creative consultant.
Right, but of course it raises questions about authorship and intellectual property. Who would get the credit for the work?
That's a valid point. It's something we'd need to figure out as these collaborations become more common.
It's a whole new frontier.
And it's fascinating to think about how these human-robot partnerships might change the very definition of creativity.
It really is. It's like we're rewriting the rules of art.
And speaking of rewriting the rules, there's another area where robots could potentially play a role that I find both intriguing and a bit unsettling: the legal system.
I know what you mean. The idea of robots as judges or jurors sounds like something out of a science fiction movie.
Exactly. But it's not entirely far-fetched, is it? We already rely on algorithms and artificial intelligence in so many aspects of our lives.
You're right. And there are definitely arguments to be made for the potential benefits of robots in the legal system. For example, robots wouldn't be susceptible to the same biases and emotions that can sometimes influence human judges and jurors.
That's a good point. They could potentially make more objective and impartial decisions based purely on the facts of the case.
Exactly. And they could process vast amounts of information and analyze legal precedents much faster and more efficiently than humans can.
But could they truly understand the nuances of human behavior and the complexities of moral decision-making?
That's the big question, isn't it? Could a robot ever grasp the concept of mercy or take into account the mitigating circumstances that often play a role in human judgments?
It's a slippery slope,
Yeah,
and one that we need to approach with extreme caution.
absolutely. Norman emphasizes the importance of human oversight in any scenario where robots are making decisions that could have a significant impact on people's lives.
We can't just blindly trust machines to make those calls.
Right, we need to find a balance between harnessing the potential of artificial intelligence and preserving the essential human elements of justice and compassion.
It's a delicate balance, for sure, but it's a conversation we need to be having as technology continues to advance.
Absolutely. And speaking of conversations, there's another area where robots could potentially play a role that's both exciting and a bit controversial: spiritual guidance.
Robot priests, robot gurus. Now, that's a concept I've never considered before.
I know it sounds strange, but as technology becomes more integrated into our lives, it's natural to explore its potential in every aspect of human experience, including our spiritual journeys.
So are we talking about robots leading religious services or offering spiritual guidance?
It could be anything from guiding meditations to facilitating religious rituals to offering words of wisdom from different spiritual traditions.
It's an intriguing idea, but it also raises a lot of questions. Can a robot truly understand the complexities of human spirituality? Can it provide genuine comfort and support in times of need?
Those are important questions, and I don't think anyone has definitive answers yet, but it's a conversation worth having as we continue to develop these increasingly sophisticated machines.
And it highlights the need to approach this topic with sensitivity and respect. We can't just assume that technology has all the answers when it comes to something as personal and profound as spirituality.
I completely agree, and as we explore the possibilities of robots as spiritual companions, it's crucial to remember that our spiritual growth is ultimately a personal journey, one that requires introspection, connection with others, and a willingness to grapple with the big questions of life.
And while robots might be able to offer support and guidance along the way, they can never replace the human element that's so essential to our spiritual well-being.
Beautifully said. It's a reminder that technology should be a tool to enhance our lives, not to dictate our beliefs or define our humanity.
And that brings us to another fascinating and potentially controversial topic: the idea of robots as caregivers.
It's a topic that's becoming increasingly relevant as the global population ages and the demand for healthcare services continues to grow.
Imagine robots assisting with tasks like bathing, dressing, and medication reminders, freeing up human caregivers to focus on more complex and emotionally demanding aspects of care.
Right, it sounds like it could have a huge impact on the healthcare industry, improving the quality of life for both patients and caregivers.
But wouldn't there be concerns about robots providing care that's traditionally been seen as inherently human?
Absolutely. It raises ethical questions about empathy, compassion, and the nature of care itself. Can a robot truly provide the same level of emotional support and connection that a human caregiver can?
That's a tough one. I mean, robots can be programmed to perform tasks and even to simulate empathy,
Hmm.
but can they truly understand what it means to be human and to need care?
It's a complex issue and one that we need to approach with a lot of thought and consideration. Norman stresses the importance of designing robot caregivers that are not only physically capable, but also emotionally intelligent and sensitive to the unique needs of each individual patient.
So it's not just about creating robots that can perform tasks efficiently. It's about creating robots that can connect with patients on a human level, offering comfort, companionship, and even a sense of dignity.
Exactly. And it raises all sorts of questions about how we train and regulate these robot caregivers, ensuring that they're providing care that's both ethical and effective.
It's like we're entering a whole new frontier in healthcare, one where technology and humanity will need to find a way to coexist and collaborate in a way that benefits everyone.
It's a fascinating and challenging time to be alive. And speaking of challenging, let's talk about another potential application for robots in healthcare therapy.
Robot therapists. That sounds like something out of a science fiction movie.
Hmm.
Can you imagine pouring your heart out to a machine?
I know it sounds strange, but as artificial intelligence continues to advance, some researchers believe that robots could one day provide effective therapy for a range of mental health conditions.
But therapy is so much about human connection and empathy. Could a robot really replicate that?
That's the big question, and it's one that's generating a lot of debate. Some people believe that robots could never truly understand the complexities of human emotions and provide the same level of support as a human therapist.
While others argue that robots could actually be more objective and non-judgmental than human therapists,
Yeah.
creating a safe and comfortable environment for patients to open up.
And there's also the potential for robots to provide therapy to people who might not have access to human therapists, whether due to cost, location, or stigma.
So it's not about replacing human therapists, but rather about exploring new ways to provide mental health care to more people.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that therapy is a multifaceted process. And robots might be able to play a role in certain aspects of that process, even if they can't completely replicate the human element.
It's like we're still in the early stages of exploring the potential of robots in therapy, and it'll be interesting to see how this field develops in the years to come.
Absolutely. And speaking of exploring new possibilities, let's shift gears and talk about robots in education.
Robot teachers, that sounds like something out of a futuristic classroom.
It does, doesn't it? But as education continues to evolve, robots are being seen as a potential tool to enhance the learning experience, especially when it comes to personalized instruction and adapting to different learning styles.
So imagine a robot that could tailor its lessons to your individual needs, providing instant feedback and adjusting its approach based on how you're learning.
Exactly. And they could be available 204/7, offering support and encouragement whenever you need it.
That sounds amazing. But of course, there are concerns about the role of technology in education. Some people worry that robots will replace human teachers, leading to a less personalized and less engaging learning experience.
That's a valid concern. The human connection is so important in education. It's about more than just conveying information. It's about inspiring curiosity, fostering creativity, and building relationships.
I completely agree, and that's why it's important to think about robots as tools to enhance the role of human teachers, not to replace them.
Right, they can provide personalized instruction, offer additional support, and even free up human teachers to focus on more complex and emotionally demanding aspects of teaching, like mentoring and fostering critical thinking.
So it's about creating a collaborative learning environment where technology and human expertise work together to provide the best possible education for all students.
Exactly. It's about finding the right balance, harnessing the power of technology while preserving the essential human elements of teaching and learning.
And speaking of balance, there's another area where robots could potentially play a role that I find both fascinating and a bit intimidating: the arts.
I know what you mean. The idea of robots creating music, art, or literature seems to challenge our very notion of what it means to be human and to be creative.
Exactly. But as artificial intelligence becomes more sophisticated, some researchers believe that robots could one day collaborate with humans on creative projects, perhaps even pushing the boundaries of human creativity in new and unexpected directions.
Imagine a robot that could help you brainstorm ideas, generate novel concepts, or even provide feedback on your work from a different perspective.
It would be like having a creative partner who could bring a whole new set of skills and perspectives to the table.
Exactly, and it could lead to the creation of art that's truly innovative and unique, blending human and artificial intelligence in exciting new ways.
But wouldn't there be concerns about the robot's influence on the final product? Who would get the credit? Would even be considered art if a robot was involved in its creation?
Those are great questions, and they highlight the complex issues we'll need to grapple with as robots become more integrated into the creative industries. It's a topic that's sure to spark a lot of debate in the years to come.
And it's a reminder that technology is constantly evolving, pushing us to reconsider our assumptions and to redefine what's possible. It's an exciting and challenging time to be alive, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely, and speaking of exciting and challenging, let's delve into a topic that's been on my mind lately: the potential for robots to play a role in our spiritual lives.
Robot priests, robot gurus. Now, that's a concept I've never considered before.
It's definitely a thought-provoking one, and it's not as far-fetched as it might sound as technology becomes more integrated into our lives. It's natural to explore its potential in every aspect of human experience, including our spiritual journeys.
So are we talking about robots leading religious services or offering spiritual guidance?
It could be anything from guiding meditations to facilitating religious rituals to offering words of wisdom from different spiritual traditions.
It's an intriguing idea, but it also raises a lot of questions. Can a robot truly understand the complexities of human spirituality? Can it provide genuine comfort and support in times of need?
Those are important questions. I don't think anyone has definitive answers yet, but it's a conversation worth having as we continue to develop these increasingly sophisticated machines.
And it highlights the need to approach this topic with sensitivity and respect. We can't just assume that technology has all the answers when it comes to something as personal and profound as spirituality.
I completely agree. And as we explore the possibilities of robots as spiritual companions, it's crucial to remember that our spiritual growth is ultimately a personal journey, one that requires introspection, connection with others, and a willingness to grapple with the big questions of life.
And while robots might be able to offer support and guidance along the way, they can never replace the human element that's so essential to our spiritual well-being.
Beautifully said. It's a reminder that technology should be a tool to enhance our lives, not to dictate our beliefs or define our humanity.
Yeah, it really makes you think about where all this is headed.
Right.
How technology is going to continue to shape our lives in ways that we can't even imagine right now.
It's both exciting and a little bit scary at the same time.
It is. And, it's funny because we started this whole conversation talking about teapots,
Yeah, those 3 teapots.
right, and how they represent these different levels of design. But it's amazing how much these concepts apply to everything, from the simplest everyday objects to those incredibly complex machines like robots.
It really is. In Norman's book, it does such a good job of opening our eyes to the power of design to influence our emotion or behaviors, even our sense of self.
Yeah, it's like we're not always aware of how much thought and intention goes into the things that we interact with every day and how those things are shaping our experiences.
Right, and as technology continues to evolve, it's more important than ever to consider that emotional impact.
We're not just designing objects anymore.
No strengths differences.
We're designing experiences.
Exactly, and those experiences have the power to shape our thoughts, our feelings, even our relationships with one another.
So it's like we have a responsibility to design those experiences in a way that's both beneficial and ethical.
I think so. We need to be mindful of the potential consequences of our creations, both positive and negative.
And it's not just up to the designers either. As consumers, we have a role to play too.
Oh, absolutely.
We need to be more aware of how design is influencing us and make choices that align with our values.
Right, and maybe even demand better design from the companies that we support.
Exactly. So the next time you find yourself drawn to a particular product or captivated by a certain experience, take a moment to consider why. What is it about that design that's speaking to you on an emotional level?
Is it the visual appeal, the intuitive functionality, or maybe the deeper meaning that it holds for you? By understanding these 3 levels of design, visceral, behavioral, and reflective, we can become more conscious consumers, making choices that enhance our lives.
Yeah.
And, as creators, we can use this knowledge to design things that are not only functional, but also beautiful, meaningful, and emotionally engaging.
It's about creating a world where technology serves humanity.
Absolutely. And I think that's a great point to end on, Nadita. It's been a fascinating journey exploring the world of emotional design with you today.
It has, and I think we both learned a lot.
I agree. And to our listeners out there, we encourage you to keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those emotions engaged. Until next time, happy diving.